So let's give it a sukoon. Af. We're constantly exhaling. What's another example? Ha. Ah. What's another example? Yes. As. That, for example. Ath. Good. Ak. Gaf, we're exhaling. That, we're exhaling, for example. At. Right? You have that exhalation that happens after the sound of the ta. That's hams. And jahar is the opposite of hams. So what's an example of a letter with jahar? Ab. What else? Good. Apple. Good. What else? Besides the qalqala letters. An. Right? For example, Sirat al-ladhina. An. We don't say an. We don't say ara. So these are all letters of jahar. So those are our first two pairs. Very good. What are our next pairs? Rikhawa and shidda. Who can remind me what is rikhawa? What is shidda?
The one that we said is ramping.
It ramps up. Okay. It's a word. It's a type of letter that whenever it is that you wish to pronounce rikhawa, you don't abruptly start reciting it, but rather you ramp up into that sound. An example is ja. What else? No, ba is actually the opposite of rikhawa. What's the opposite of rikhawa? Shidda. So let me explain. The letters of shidda are ajid qatim bakat. Hamza, Jim, Dal, Qaf, Ta, Ba, Kaf, Ta. Correct? Yes? Ajid, Qatim, Bakat. You can remember this little acronym if you are good at memorizing it. Ajid, Qatin, Ajid, Qatin. Now when we say Qatin, it's two kasras on the Ta. So Noon is not a part of it. Bakat. Yeah, ba, kaf, and ta. So, Hamza, Jim, Dal, Qaf, Ta, Ba, Kaf, Ta. These are the letters of shidda. So let's first and foremost focus on the sound of shidda. When I say وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُو Buruj. Bu. When I say the letter ba, you can imagine as soon as I start saying it, the ba is pronounced wholly. I don't ramp up into the sound of ba. Its opposite would be a sound like which letter? Tha, right? For example, can you give me a word in Arabic? Thawab, tha. Thawab. If I say thawab, it doesn't have a harsh starting point, but rather it's something that you build up into. People don't usually have as much difficulty on these two sets. That's why we're going to the next set. What's the next set? Istifal and Isti'la. Okay. What do we know about those two? And those are the two we focused on yesterday. Isti'ala is what? Whenever you raise the tongue to the top of the mouth. Okay. When we pronounce it. So what is an example of a letter of Isti'la? Saw. Okay. What else? Kha, sa, ba, qa, va. Very good. So the acronym for these is what? Who knows? Khussa dhatin qil. You don't have to memorize the acronym. So the idea is whenever you have one of those letters, it has to rhyme with la. The opposite is what? Istifal. That the tongue should remain down, that you don't have the sound. So these two sifas, I want you to focus on them. And the next two sifas, which were what? Idlaq and Ismat. Skip these two. These are not the two I'm talking about. What's the next two? Sorry? Itbaq and Infitah. So what is Itbaq? Who can remind me?
It's rounding the mouth.
It's the rounding of the mouth that makes that kind of that rounded sound. It's similar to Isti'la in the sense that all of the letters of Itbaq will also rhyme with Allah, right? But they have a more rounded sound. It's even more dramatic in these. And there's only 4 letters. What are those four letters? Sad, Dad, Ta, Dha. Okay. These four sifat, in other words, infitah, itbaq, istifal, isti'la. These are the four that I want us to focus on today as we identify letters that have these qualities. So as we go back, and we go to the list of exercises we did yesterday. These exercises. What page was it on? Someone remember it?
9, 10.
It was exercise 9 and 10, but what page? On 30 something? Yes. I sent it in the group. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and look at page number.
Page 9 and
Yeah, page 9 and 10. No, today I want us to look at page number 19. Okay? Now we're moving on to three-letter words. The first of them, on the right side, is the word za. Can you all try to read that one for me? Based off what you're seeing? Za, ra, a. If you look at za, ra, a, we have three letters. Who can tell me what the qualities are of za, ra, and a based off of what we learned yesterday? Za. Is it itbaq? Is it infitah? First and foremost, let's figure that out. Is za itbaq or infitah? Infitah. Good. Is za going to be istifal or isti'la? Istifal. Which means when we pronounce it, how should we pronounce it? Okay, so can you try reading it? Just that letter for me? Za. Za. Say it with me. Za. Now the second letter is ra. We learned some special qualities of ra. One of them is that when it has a fatha, it will be recited with tafkhim, meaning it will be recited heavily. Just like we recite isti'la letters. So how would we recite the second letter? Ra. Ra. Za. Ra. And the third letter is a. Is this a letter that should have istifal or isti'la? Istifal. Good. So how do we pronounce it? A. Good. Let's try our second word. I want you all to try it. Dha, ra, a. Good. Now in dha, ra, a, we have the same exact thing that was happening in the first word. What's the same thing happening? Dha. Istifal. That is also infitah. Your mouth should open when you pronounce it. That. That. Good. Ra, on the other hand, is just as we learned before. And Hamza is also a letter of istifal and infitah. Let's try our third one. Satara. What's wrong with satara?
You're making the scene heavy.
I'm making the scene heavy. Why am I making the scene heavy?
Because the rest of the letters are heavy.
Because ta and ra both have which qualities? Of isti'la. Good. I don't want to make scene, poor scene, no longer be distinguished from its two peers. So I have to say that how? Sa, ta, sa, ta, ra. Yes. Satara. Yeah, just because we're reading it slowly doesn't mean that a qari of the Quran will not read it quickly. If you can recite it properly slowly, you can recite it properly quickly too. We have to start off slowly. Let's try our fourth. Sata. Yeah, so I won't say satara. Why would I not say satara?
Because it makes the ra like
yeah, I would make it mun infitah. I would give it istifat. So I have to say sata ra, sata ra, sata ra, sata ra. Good. Let's try our second line. Asada. Easy, right? They're all infitah. They're all istifat. Good. Our second letter word is Asada. 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 Now you have the heavy letter in the middle, and it wants to influence before it and after. You cannot let it pull the other letters into itself. Let's try our next two. Bata. Bata ra. Okay, good. And our fourth one? Good. But what is your instinct telling you to do? Batara, right? Batara. Why? Because the ba wants to follow the ta. So you can't say batara. Batara would be wrong, right? Like saying al-basit to Allah would be wrong, right? So we have to keep the ba with the quality of infitah and istifad. So we have to say batara. Batara. Okay, good. Let's try our next two. Taraka. Tara. Yeah, good. So taraka. Taraka. So your tongue, your mouth has to move in order to pronounce the heavy letter in the middle. Your tongue has to raise. Your body doesn't want to do that because your body wants to be lazy. But you have to force that change in order to recite this properly. Which one were we on? Okay. Now the next word is taraqa. What is taraqa? What is taraqa? Throw a rock? Taraqa means to hit something, to knock on something. Right? وَالسَّمَاءِ وَالطَّارِقَ, for example. Tariq comes from these words. What are our next two? Rasafa. Rasafa. Fa. You have to keep fa with infitah with istifad. Our next word is Rasama. Rasama. Good. Rasama. Rasama. What's Rasama? Yes, good. To write or draw. Good. All right, our next line. Let's try these four. Dawra'a. Good. Dawra'a. Dawra'a. Try it again. Not da. Not da. Da requires your tongue to touch the roof of the mouth. Da. Not da. Da. Your tongue needs to come a little forward towards your incisors.
Towards your teeth.
Yes. Da. Da. No, say da. Like say the.
So
No, like the book. Say the book.
The book.
You say the book? No, come on, you're not from the hood. You say the, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not the like English, but it's also not da. What's between that is da. Da. Your tongue has. Sorry, what were you saying?
Almost at the base of the front teeth.
Yes, exactly. So the base of the incisors, the tip of your tongue should make contact with that. That's the only way to say da. Good. So dawra'a. Dawra'a. Good. We had to work on this. That. By the way, it's a common Malaysian, Indonesian issue that they say da. Let's try our next word. Daraba. Okay, good. Next two. Now fa. Fa. Yes, it has to be in fitah. Good. We can't say fa. We can't say fa. Fa, sa. Good. Fa, sa, la. All right. Our next word. Fasada. Fasada. That's easy. They're all the same quality. All right, we're gonna do one more exercise before we talk about our next discussion. Let's try this. Farada. Good. Farada. And what's our second word? Farada. Now, the second one seems to be different and harder. Why do you think the second one is harder than the first?
Because the first one is
Because
all.
the ending
No,
is
no.
Yeah.
This
Mm.
one is not all
No, the first one, they're not all light. The ra is heavy.
Yeah.
But in the second one, we have two heavy letters.
Yeah, and back to that.
Ra and Ra.
And that will affect the first letter. So instead of saying farada, what do you think most people would say? They'll say farada, fa, farada. It's not fa, it's fa, farada. Good. Let's try the next two. Waka, waka. Yes.
So if you say like al heavy, for Ra,
Farada, yeah.
but you don't have any other letter for, right?
Good, you're right. So you won't change the meaning,
Yeah, it won't
but you'll change the pronunciation.
So
And
will
the-
it impact?
Will it impact your thawab? Yes. It'll impact your reward. You may not say something that means something else.
Yes.
Like if you made a mistake
so that
with,
leniency is also not there. Huh?
you'll get a sin if you do this on purpose. If you don't make an attempt to change it to better yourself, but you may not change the meaning. But with respect to other words,
Yeah, if it
you can
changes
very
the
much
meaning,
easily change the meaning due to the incorrect pronunciation. So let's try the third one.
Ra, for, Ra,
Wa, now waka.
Ra, for, Ra,
Good. Waqara.
Ra, for, Ra.
Now waka. Ali, you're saying waka. Okay. Good. What's the next one? Wakaza. Wakaza. What is wakaza? Wakaza is in the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. فَوَكَزَهُ مُوسَى. وَكَزَهُ Musa means he punched him. Musa alayhi salam hit someone, remember?
Yeah.
That's the word in the Quran. What's our next line?
Salaba.
Salaba. What's salaba? Pronunciation.
Salaba.
They're all light, right? Okay, let's try our next one.
Salaba.
Salaba. Salaba.
But I feel like when the heavy word is in the front, it doesn't impact it as much as when it's in the back.
Yeah, maybe for you. Like it could be different for people, right? But I also feel that way. Now, this is an example of a word that if you mispronounced one of these letters, you would change the meaning dramatically. Salaba means to negate in the Arabic language. To negate. Salaba means to hang someone to death. So salib, you know what the salib is in Christianity? What is that? The cross, right? So
That
salaba.
comes with for.
Yes. So this is an example of words you can change the meaning very easily. Salaba comes from salbi, which means something negative or something negated. All right, let's try our next two. Qasama. Okay, easy. Next one. Good. Qasama. Not qasama. Qasam. Good. Our next line. Good. Rada'a. Yeah, so we want to protect which letter? Which one is that threat here? That we might accidentally say what? And that's what the next word is, right? Rada'a.
That means to like feed or
To breastfeed, yes. Arda'a is actually the breastfeeding, but same letters. Okay. Let's try our next two. Na khatara. Good. Khatara. Good. I see you're trying to hide the ta. You're trying to just not say it. You're scared of it. Khatara. Khatara. What's the next one?
I was reading the next one.
Khatara. Khatara. Good. How about the next two? Na na da. Dha is a letter of what? Isti'la. Not na tha. Nadha. Nadhara. What is nadhara? To see, right? Nadhara. Right? Like in Urdu you say nazar. Nazar lagi. Or in Hindi. Nadhara. However, what's the next one? Not naza. Good. Nadhara means to make a devotion, an act, to promise Allah an act of devotion. It's a very different meaning. From nadhara means to see. Nadhara means to make a promise to Allah. Oh Allah, if I get married, I'll pray 100 rak'ats. That's nadhara. The second one. Okay? What are our last two? Nasaba and good. Nasaba. These are two different Arabic words. They have different meanings. Nasab, your nasab is your lineage. Your nasab or your nasib is your portion that Allah has appropriated towards you in life. Or any portion, like a portion of a sale or a portion of a business agreement, is your nasib.
Is destiny the right word?
For nasib? I mean, it could be, but like nasib is more like the share of what you are given. Like it's more like a quantifiable thing. Your destiny is not always quantified. Okay. So we're going to skip this next set. Inshallah, I'm going to test you on these in tomorrow's class. Today we're going to now begin our discussion with respects to the rules of Tajweed that we have learned other than isti'la, istifal, and so on and so forth. Okay. Part of these discussions have to do with the script of the Quran. Because when you're learning Tajweed, you're not just learning about the Arabic language. You have to learn about al-Rasm al-Uthmani. You have to learn about how it is that the Quran was written in the text that we have today. We call that al-Rasm al-Uthmani, which means the Uthmanic Codex, which is the way that Uthman radiallahu anhu had compiled the Quran and had and scripted it out. Now, why is that important? It's important because the way that you typically write Arabic, that can change over centuries, right? The Arabic script can change. Like for an example, certain things are natural parts of language progression, like fonts. Fonts change, right? So like certain masahif of the Arabic language that you'll find today, fa and qaf are written differently. So for fa, they might have a dot on top, and for qaf, instead of having two dots on top, they'll just have one dot below the fa. So scripts can change in terms of their fonts. But there are other things that also make scripts different, modern scripts different from the Quran. One of those additions is the fact that when we look at the mushaf that we have today, we sometimes have something called an alif saghira. We have this mini alif. An alif saghira, for example, whenever we have a little alif that sits on top of a word telling you to stretch that word. In modern Arabic, you may not always have an alif saghira. In modern Arabic, you might just put an alif there as a whole. So for example, if you look at the board, I've written Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The word Rahman, what do you see on top of the mim? You see the baby alif, right? The small alif.
What is that? Alif
Saghira, which just means small, right? But in modern Arabic script, if you had a word like Rahman, you would typically write it with an actual alif telling you to stretch. Similarly, in the Quran, sometimes we see the word Ibrahim. Ibrahim. Now, Ibrahim, where's the mud in the word Ibrahim? Think about it. After the ha, and where else? After the ra, we have an alif, right? Sometimes in the mushaf of the Uthmani mushaf, what we'll find is that there is no mud after the ha, but there's an alif saghira, a baby alif, sitting on the floor. So it's telling you to stretch Ibrahim, but there's no ya that's actually written there.
So the big alif is on me.
Yes, yes. Yes, it's a small alif. That's right.
So you don't have me alif.
No, you don't. In the Quran, you don't. In Arabic, you can write whatever you want, but when we read the Quran, it's not always going to be written that way. That's why it's crucial that you learn how each mushaf is written, because every mushaf is written differently depending on the standard that they've adopted.
You mean to say the pronunciation has not changed, but the script can change.
The script, we keep according to how Uthman radiallahu anhu wrote it. Okay? We don't change the script. The script is in accordance to how Uthman radiallahu anhu wrote it. We don't add letters, we don't subtract letters. Okay? But what we do add is sometimes we add little marks that tell you how to pronounce that word. Like the alif saghira, It didn't exist in the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu.
You just knew already.
They just knew that you're supposed to stretch this meme and say Rahman instead of saying Rahman. Rahman ar-Rahim. They knew you don't say Rahman ar-Rahim. You say Rahman. Yes.
I have a question. So like, in like this day and age, are there still like
Additions.
that like come up with like
Yeah, like the color-coded mushaf.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like we have these colored Tajweed mushafs that tell you in order to do ikhfa you have to have a red color. Of course, they didn't exist in the time, even 50 years ago, that never existed. It only existed after color printing became cheap. Right? Recently that happened. That didn't happen before you were born, really. Like maybe 10, 20 years before you were born, might have been the first color-coded mushaf.
So the time Tampeed wasn't there.
What wasn't there?
Tampeed.
Talqit.
Tampeed.
Tanqid, yeah, yes. So he's saying at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, there were no dots, as we know. And these dots were simply known. Like this word only has two possibilities. If a word has, just the shape of a ba, but it has no dot of ba, you would just know this is either a ba, this is either a ya, this is either a that, this is either a tha, or this is either a noon. They knew it has to be one of those possibilities. And by looking at the word, they could deduce it has to be this possible word, right? But imagine if a word had like 5 or 6 different empty blocks like that. That word could maybe have 20, 30 possibilities. But they knew because they relied more on memory. One reason is for that is the Quran is not a written tradition, right? Our deen is not a written tradition. Somebody says, can you prove the Quran is unchanged? The worst example to give them is to say, oh look, we still have this mushaf from the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu. That's a weak evidence. Written evidence is weak, okay? Because someone back then could have lied and wrote that mushaf. The stronger evidence is we have hufaz.
Exactly. So if the Quran was, they say like the example is like the Quran was all burned or having the Quran,
Of
they
course,
come back within,
of course, in seconds, right? The people of Gaza, they recite the Quran every day in one sitting. Right? They have halaqat where they recite the whole Quran every single day in one sitting. More than 100 people there. So this is not a big deal. So as Muslims, we have to understand that our tradition is preserved through memory, and this is why it was easy for the companions. They would memorize things. Now, with respect to the changes or the things that we ought to know about our mushaf that are very crucial to understand. Adrian, if you don't mind grabbing me that big blue mushaf, so I can find some examples for you all. Jazakallah khair. Alright, so whenever it is we look at a mushaf like this, there's a couple of things to know. The first of them is that in the Uthmani mushaf, what you sometimes have is that you have an alif saghira that seemingly sits on top of an empty letter. So let me explain. I just opened up the Quran. The first word that I saw was the word al-qurba. Al-qurba. Now, qurba. When you hear this, I just want you to think based off of your auditory skills. Which letter am I stretching in al-qurba? Ba. So, good. Now, if I wanted to write ba in the Arabic language, what are my options? How could I write ba? Ba with a... What should the ba have?
I should have
A fatha, and after that fatha, what can I have? Just an alif. That's one way to write it. What's another way to write it? If I want to make that sound, ba, what's another way to write it? With an alif saghira, a ba with the alif saghira. Except, here's the thing, is that you will have the alif saghira in this mushaf sitting not on top of the ba. You will have the alif saghira sitting on the empty letter after the ba. So, in this mushaf, if you all want to look, there's a ya after the ba. In al-qurba, we have a ya. You all see this?
Yeah.
And it seems like the alif saghira is on the ya. However,
But we know that it is on ba.
you know that it's on ba. That's because, mashallah, you're smart. But I'll show you something interesting. And that is that if you open up to the same surah in another mushaf, like this Persian mushaf, the Persian scripted mushaf. Yes. I want you to look at the exact same word. If you look inside this mushaf, you'll always have the alif saghira sitting on top of the ba itself.
Just directly on top.
It's directly on the ba. But in this mushaf, you have a fatha on the ba, and then you have an alif saghira on the next letter.
Yeah.
In this mushaf, you never have a fatha on the ba. You guys understand the difference? So, the difference is that in the Uthmani mushaf, whenever you have an alif saghira, the alif saghira will occur alongside a fatha dhamma or a kasra. So you have a fatha and then you have an alif saghira telling you, stretch the fatha right before this. In this mushaf, there'll never be a fatha. It'll just be an alif saghira. And you should just know, obviously, there's going to be a fatha that I'm supposed to stretch.
So, and it's always fatha, right? Like,
No, it could be a kasra,
Kasra.
and it could be other, it could even be a dhamma as well.
So you wouldn't have the fatha, kasra, or dhamma
In this, yes, it would not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, here's another example. Now let's look at kasra, okay? And the same page. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fi harthihi. You guys see this word, harthihi?
But there is no.
So that thing after the ha, that's the kasra version of an alif saghira in this mushaf. It's another ya. You see that mini ya that's being written after the ha?
You know, Sheikh, I always wondered what that meant. I knew to like kind of like stretch it out and pause, but
Okay, so listen. We look at the same thing here, and look at how it's written very differently. Look at ayah number 20 of Surah Shura. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fi harthihi. How do they write harthihi here?
they have
just
the
have
mini,
They have the mini alif saghira under the ha.
ha.
But is there a kasra under the ha?
No.
No.
And in this mushaf, is there a kasra under the ha?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and then it's followed by the stretch mark.
Gotcha.
You see how masahif write things in different ways. Like different mushafs have adopted different standards of how we write.
This
This is
very common
in the Pakistani Indian and even Turkish, like many parts of the world.
So, Sheikh, would you recommend like a person stick to one type of mushaf at least?
Yeah, so I mean, this mushaf is better for you.
Okay.
The Uthmani mushaf is better, but it's harder. Like there's more easy, like shortcuts that are given in such a. Yeah, this is harder for sure.
But we grew up
There are many things you don't know about this. Like you're making mistakes, you just don't know you're making mistakes.
And it's not color coded, you know?
No, you don't need the color codes.
but we grew up with
So you grew up with this, right? You might be used to this. But definitely this mushaf has benefits.
So the Medina.
This is the Medina mushaf, yes. Okay. So anytime you see an alif saghira, like a kasra saghira, like for example, you see the word ibadihi in this word, ibadihi. You see the kasra under the ha, then you see the mini ya. In this mushaf, what would you see instead?
It would just go straight to the
You just have the alif saghira sitting under the ha. Good. So these are some differences of how mudud or muds are written within the Quran. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. That's just one. There are going to be plenty of differences. One of those differences that I wanted to talk today about is the noon qutni.
Is it written somewhere here in this one? Baghdadi?
No.
When we need to.
No, in the Qaida Baghdadi, they're going to teach you, like if you go through it, they're going to teach you how mud looks. And the Qaida Baghdadi is in accordance to this script. Okay? So like if you go through the book and they show you the muds, they'll show you how it looks in this mushaf. Whereas the Nurani Qaida you probably grew up studying teaches you how to read this.
This is the one.
Yes. Alright, today I want to speak about Noon Qutni. Has anyone ever heard of what a Noon Qutni is?
Noon Qutni?
Al Qutni. No one, huh? Okay.
Sheikh, real quick, before I have a quick question. So at the end of an ayah,
Yes.
a lot of times we don't like pronounce the actual like
The haraka.
haraka there. Is that like strictly in like the Uthmani, or is that like in this one? Does it do the exact same thing as in the Uthmani?
Of course, of course. We're reciting the Quran the same way. We're writing it a little bit differently with respect to the additional signs that were not a part of the original Uthmani Mus'haf. Any differences that you see, none of them were a part of the original Mus'haf. These are basically crutches to teach you how to pronounce what's written there.
So was there like it started just like that, or was there somebody who proposed this and it's
Of course, there are propositions, right? The first person who wished to teach Arabic grammar and to make the Quran easier to recite was Ali radiallahu anhu himself. Because in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, there were no harakat. There were no harakat. Okay, of course. It's just right after Uthman, right? So in his time and in his place, someone recited the first ayah of Surah At-Tawbah incorrectly with the wrong harakah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَرَاءَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إِلَى الَّذِينَ عَاهَدتُّم مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ فسيحوا في الأرض 4 أشهر واعلموا أنكم غير معجز الله وأن الله مخزي الكافرين وأذان من الله ورسوله إلى الناس يوم الحج الأكبر أن الله بريء من المشركين. This is a proclamation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has nothing to do with the mushrikeen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has nothing to do with what these polytheists, these people who do shirk, are doing. Allah has nothing to do with them. Allah is free of them. وَرَسُولُهُ, which means, and Allah's messengers are also free from what these mushrikeen are doing. He has nothing to do with what these mushrikeen are up to. But someone, because they didn't know the Arabic language, and Arabic language had spread far, vast east and west and non-Arab lands, someone recited this ayah. Instead of وَرَسُولُهُ, they said وَرَسُولِهِ. Okay, so how did that change the meaning? It changed the meaning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has nothing to do with these mushrikeen, and Allah has nothing to do with His Rasul. Now you've made a grand mistake because you read one harakah wrong. Okay?
This is just from one person?
Yeah, one person made this mistake, but when Ali radiallahu anhu heard it, he was incredibly shocked. Like, how could someone ever make a mistake like that? Naturally, these are the Arab. They understood the language well. They didn't have any problems understanding what harakah should be there. They knew the grammar and the language well. So this is when the first adoptions of teaching, even formalizing Arabic grammar began. He actually began the process of teaching Arabic grammar. The first person who formalized Arabic grammar into a science was Ali radiallahu anhu.
He said that he was uneducated. So how then?
This is how they spoke.
How then he knew all these things?
These things were not taught in school. This is how they naturally spoke.
Yeah, so the Quraysh, that was the...
That's just how they spoke.
That's,
So
that's why the Mu'jiz of
But
Quran
because this
came
is,
with
I
him,
mean,
because they were
he has to be an expert.
no, you don't have to be an expert. See, the thing is, to be an expert, you have to be taught something formally, right? But there are examples of, the children of doctors who know many hundreds of diseases and their prognosis and their diagnosis and the drugs that are used. You wouldn't consider that kid to be like an educated person. He grew up in the house of people who were speaking this way. So he spoke this way. So imagine that on a grand scale. Imagine if everyone speaks with the proper Arabic grammar. You don't need a grammar class. Like us, I'm not educated well in English, but very seldom could someone come and critique my English and say, you've said this wrong. Because to me, wrong English grammar is so foreign of an idea that it would stand out as wrong immediately. But I know nothing of English grammar. I studied in 7th grade formally. Like, that's the last time I studied English. From that point onwards, I never studied English. I just took tests. Like, I homeschooled, right? I never studied English formally. But it's very seldom that you'll find me make a mistake in English grammar, even though our culture and society doesn't care about grammar. But I just listen to people who speak properly. Hence, I know how to speak properly. So, the Arabs were people who were proud of their language. The Arabs were people who, their language was what brought them honor, and their language was what uplifted their tribe, and their language was what gave them opportunities. Because this is how they dominated others.
How did they then find an educated person in the society if it is not based on knowledge? Because that's the only thing they know.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
So how did they then define an educated?
Oh, how did they define? So when we're talking about the Prophet ﷺ, we don't call him uneducated. We consider him unlettered. Okay, that means he didn't read, and he didn't write, and he didn't learn from any textual sources. That means that the information that the Prophet ﷺ obtained throughout the course of his life, everyone knows from whence it came. Where did it come from? It came from the people that he socialized with throughout the course of his 40 years prior to being a prophet. So the miracle of the Quran is not in the fact that this was a God forbid ignorant person speaking about grand ideas. The Prophet was not ignorant. He was not jahil. He was a morally upright individual. He knew what was right. He knew what was wrong. He knew wisdom and what composed wisdom in the Arab society. It's not that he was an ignorant person, but he wasn't right. He was unlettered, and that he didn't have the capacity to learn these stories of previous nations from the books of the Jews. He didn't have the capacity to learn about the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam by secretly, having access to a text of a different, culture, because according to everyone's testimony, no one in their society who lived with him taught him how to read or write. And this is a skill that very few Arabs had, right? Uthman radiallahu anhu was distinguished because he knew how to read and write. So that quality of knowing how to read and write was only exclusive to the elite, to those who had lots of wealth, whose parents, gave them such an education. And the educators were few. So they knew exactly who was learned and who was not learned. But despite the fact that he wasn't learned, formally, he didn't formally learn how to read and write, does not mean that he didn't know how to speak. Right? One can know how to speak without ever knowing how to read or write. As you know, there are many languages in today's world that don't have a written record.
Speaking is different from knowing all this.
See, it's foreign to you and I because the grammatical systems of our languages do not allow so many dramatic changes in meaning based off of the change of pronunciation. Right? Our linguistic systems don't have that quality. But Semitic languages all do. It's not just Arabic that has this quality. Hebrew has the exact same quality. Aramaic has the same exact quality. Syriac has the exact same quality. Any Semitic language, and Ugaritic is one of the older languages. The languages that are spoken in Himyar in Yemen prior to Islam, they had this exact same quality. So these languages all evolved with this same exact sense of grammar. That grammar in some systems involves prefixes and suffixes, like in English. In English, that's how we change the meaning of a word. In Arabic, you don't have to add prefixes and suffixes. You can change the haraka. Yeah. So just because it's foreign to us, which makes it difficult and complicated, does not mean that it's not conceivable that someone can learn that without ever learning how to read and write. In fact, there are many people today who don't know how to read and write Arabic, from the tribes of the what you would consider the Badia or the Falahis, right? Yeah. They don't know how to read and write. Many of them have never read and wrote, but they sing poetry.
My family is Falahi.
Yeah, so Sheikh Hassan Abu Nawr from Palestine.
Yeah.
His Arabic's beautiful. He said his grandmother never knew how to read or write, but they spoke, and they spoke properly, right? So this is a common thing. It's just, to us, it's such a foreign idea because we come from places where the educated masses are the only people who speak properly, and the people who speak properly, those cultures have a 95% literacy rate. So to us, it's how could somebody not know how to read or write, yet know all of these these millions of variations,
intricacies of language.
Yeah, it just comes naturally. Someone who grows up like that.
I'm surprised. It has so many intricacies.
Yeah,
details
the Arabic language is very unique. When you study the Arabic language, you'll understand why. I understand. I can relate. As a non-Arab, I can understand. Even to the Arabs, this is an intriguing language because they don't know how deep it is. Many Arabs don't, right? But subhanallah, his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even his own speech, the hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is jawami al-kalim. It's miraculous in the sense that
it is concise.
It's concise, right? It was very concise, but it conveyed immense meaning, right? But he wasn't someone who had studied formally, even according to his own enemies. He didn't steal this from any poets of the time. It was unique. That's why they thought the only thing that we can accuse him of is sorcery, that a jinn taught him. The only thing we can accuse him of is mu'allamun, that he was a person who someone came in secret and taught. That was an accusation they knew was absurd because that society didn't have much secrecy in it. They would walk into your home without permission. You know, that's how the Arabs work. So this is from the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you know, his book has even been preserved to this day in spite of its complexity, in spite of the fact that the majority of the people who recite it don't know this language, but yet it's been preserved. It's a miracle of Allah. Now, with respect to the letters in this, the additions in this mushaf that I want to speak about briefly. One of them is this small figure that appears on top of certain letters, which looks like a mini sod. You all see this?
Yeah. Does that mean to skip the letter?
Yeah, so this is a skip sign.
Yeah.
Whenever you see this in this mushaf, that means that that letter is not to be recited. Another sound, another mark that you'll see in this Quran that tells you to ignore a letter is a mini circle. See, in normal alif, a mini circle oftentimes resembles a sukoon.
Yeah.
In this mushaf, the circle does not refer to a sukoon. The circle means skip.
Yeah.
That means that this alif, which is used for mud, is not being used for mud here. We're actually just going to use the waw for mud in the word wa'lamu or amanu a'malu. I'm not going to make this a double mud simply because there's a waw and then there's an alif. I'm skipping that alif.
And then this, yeah, and this is the sukun.
That's not a sukun, that's a shadda.
Or shadda, I'm sorry. So
Yes. Now, the last thing I wanted to speak about was Sure.
All these marks you're talking about, if you go to the end of the Muslim, it's already in the back.
But they're in Arabic.
Oh,
It's written in Arabic.
Oh, it is?
So that's why I'm explaining this. Unfortunately. Naseed, huh? Alright, our last discussion is that of Nun Qutni. Nun Qutni is an important discussion. Nun Qutni is this idea. I'll give you an example. Let's go to Surah Al-Muzammil. And in Surah Al-Muzammil, by the way, there are many of these in the Quran. That you should know them. Okay. Verse number 17 in Surah Al-Muzammil, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَكَيْفَ تَتَّقُونَ إِن كَفَرْتُمْ يَوْمًا يَجْعَلُ الْوِلْدَانَ شِيبًا. If you look at the end of this ayah, Shiba, what is the word ba end in? Shiba. It ends with the double fatha. The ba ends with the double fatha. Why am I not reciting Shiban?
Because it's the end of the ayah.
well, no, because
It's the end of a verse. So if I have two fathas,
yeah.
at the end of a verse, what do they naturally become?
Just,
One fatha. They become one fatha. Now let's imagine I don't want to stop at the end of this ayah. How would I say it? Shiban. Okay, now stop. Shiban. When you listen to that sound, Shiban. There's two ways to write that sound. Ba with the fatha and then a noon with a sukoon, or ba with two fathas. Did you all understand what he just said?
Can you say it again, sir?
The Shiban, when you hear that sound, there's two ways to visualize it. One is with two fathas, or the other is to give ba one fatha and to give after it, to place after it a noon with a sukoon. Okay? Like we learned about yesterday in the rules of Nun Sakin and Tanween. Okay. Why is that crucial and important to discuss right now? Because if I want to combine this with the next ayah, Shiban, if you can see, the next ayah begins with an alif with a skip mark. So if I have an alif with a skip mark at the beginning of an ayah, I normally give that a fatha, dhamma, or kasra. A fatha. That's not always true. This mushaf tells you when to do that and when not to do that. This mushaf does not. But in most cases, we do give it a fatha. So normally I would read this as-sama. However, because this is a temporary alif, it's not a real alif. It's a skipped alif. The way that I would combine these two ayat is, number one, step one, in Nun Qutni, and I'll formalize this rule tomorrow, inshallah, and teach it to you in depth, is I would pretend that this ban is written with an actual Nun. Pretend that it's written with an actual noon, not with a double fatha. Okay, so, and I'm going to be combining these two ayahs, right? So I'm going to say shiban. Secondly, in order to combine shiban to the next word, I have to give that noon a kasra. Shiba, Shiba, not with a kasra. Shibanis. Now this is a rule most people don't know. Why? Because they don't know the Arabic language. So if you're reading from this mushaf, you have to understand how the Arabic language works. That is in contrast to this mushaf that was made for non-Arabs. So if we open up the exact same ayah in this mushaf, it'll look very different. Okay? And I want you all to pay attention to the difference. Alright. Okay. If you look at it, يَجْعَلُ الْوِلْدَانَ شِي. What's on top of the ba? What's on top of the ba? Is it two fathas?
No.
It's one, and then look above that. You see a mini noon with a kasra. And that's telling you if you combine this ayah, you have to read it with the noon. Okay? So tomorrow we're going to look at many examples of noon qutni that are present within the Quran. Secondly, they're not always at the end of an ayah. Sometimes they're in the middle of an ayah and you're reading the ayah wrong because you don't know. You're supposed to insert an imaginary noon there. But because you don't understand that tanween in reality is actually a noon with a sukoon, you're reciting this incorrectly. We're going to look at examples.
But is that only when there's a, what is it? A fake, or
No, it couldn't even be with double kasra. It can even be with double dhamma. Yeah. Anytime you have a tanween and then you have a fake alif afterwards. Fake alif actually is wrong terminology. In real Arabic, we would call it a hamzatul wasl. When you have a hamzatul wasl is not a real hamza. It's a hamza that you just recite in order to recite that word. Like you can't start the word sama from the shadda. So you have to recite the a.
Okay.
Okay? That's a hamzatul wasl. We'll speak about it more technically tomorrow.
Here we have to use hamzatul wasl.
No, we have to use a noon qutni.
No. If we
Yeah,
stop,
you see, you have to say
if we stop
as-sama.
as-sama.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But the hamzatul wasl can sometimes have a kasra, and it can sometimes have a dhamma too. This mushaf tells you, but this mushaf does not tell you. So you have to be a little careful when studying with the Uthmani mushaf if you don't know the ahkam of Arabic.
So Sheikh, if you're like reciting, then you have to know like
How it's pronounced.
If you don't pause between the ayah.
This is how you're gonna read it. Yeah. There's some complexity there.
You said this was written for it.
This one is, but still, I still prefer everyone read from this mushaf. Okay? Like the Uthmani mushaf has benefits.
I also think it's just more legible too.
No, there are legible versions of this too. This one is just, this one has the Urdu in the middle between each of them.
Okay,
That's why it looks like that. But some of them look very clear. They print them in Medina too. I'll show you. Inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Tomorrow's class starts with Noon Qutni, and then we're going to be looking at some other exceptionary things that you'll find within these masahib. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la